This is On the Line. I'm Doug Bernard. President Obama soon begins his second term in office. From Afghanistan to China to Syria, dozens of issues in between, U.S. foreign policy is confronting many challenges. Ellen Lapson is president of the D.C.-based think tank The Stimson Center. We asked her what she thinks the next 4 years will look like.
First, we should look at the team that he's assembling, and that will tell us a bit about how he sees the next 4 years of his foreign policy. One observation that a lot of people are making is that the White House actually is playing a very central and strong role in the actual conduct of foreign policy. So it's a White House-centric foreign policy. He has, in the case of Secretary Hillary Clinton, she was somewhat unique because she had been his political rival and she was given a lot of sort of personal room of maneuver, and people think it will be somewhat less so if, assuming Senator Kerry gets confirmed as the new Secretary of State. And Senator Hagel, as the presumptive new Secretary of Defense, is also someone who very much shares Obama's worldview, is very respectful and close to the president, and so I think we will see the president really leading the tone, and he has a very distinct approach to how he wants to see America's role in the world and the evolving message that comes from the United States towards the rest of the world.
And how would you define that distinct approach?
He very much understands some of the subtle and incremental power shifts that are going on in the world, and he does not believe, I think, in the old paradigm of the United States as the policeman and as the decider-in-chief of everything that goes on in the world. He really does believe that it's a shared responsibility of other countries with the United States. The United States has some very unique leadership attributes, but the United States is not responsible for either causing or solving all of the world's problems. So I think he really believes in multilateralism, and he also believes that regional countries can bear more of the burden themselves for some of the smaller wars, conflicts, crises that take place in parts of the world in which it's not necessarily clear that there's a vital American interest at stake.
Was this multilateral approach, do you think, on display in his first term? And if so, how well did it work?
Well, remember, he inherited not only a very weak economy that became the strongest focus of his first 4 years in office, but also the drawdown of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. So he inherited a structure which was very much the United States as the dominant actor, and working, in the case of Afghanistan, with the international security forces, NATO allies, other countries that were contributing, but with the United States in a very dominant position of trying to set the war aims and how does that war end. And so that was a very much American-led process. When I say that he is multilateral in his worldview, it doesn't necessarily mean through the formal multilateral institutions like the United Nations. I think he also believes in coalitions of like-minded countries, or sort of variable geometry of sometimes it's, for example, the Iran talks are the permanent 5 countries of the UN plus Germany. So we can come up with formulas that suit whatever the problem at hand is.
Let's take a look at a few issues in turn, looking ahead to what the next 4 years may have in store. Let's turn first, in fact, to China and the South China Sea. The administration last term made what they called a pivot to Asia. How do you expect that to continue to play out in the next 4 years?
Well, remember, there was a debate over that word pivot, and some people regretted it, and so perhaps the word that is more commonly used now is rebalancing, which basically acknowledges that really it would be not too strong perhaps to say that the center of gravity of world power is shifting to Asia. Now, those are not the Obama administration's words. That's kind of my extrapolation of the world in which we live, where economic growth and economic power and eventually other forms of political power, soft power, et cetera, are going to come increasingly from these rising Asian countries. But because of China and the South China Sea, as you say, East Asia may also be a very traditional area of conflicting nationalisms, conflict disputes, in which the American presence, through our military presence but also our diplomatic presence, can be a source of greater stability and peace. And I know that the smaller countries of Asia, not China, and even China perhaps, believes that America's presence in the Asia-Pacific region is a net positive for the rise of that region.
Let's take a look at a very current and very troubled situation in Syria right now. The administration has generally kept a relative hands-off approach. Do you expect that to continue, and do you think that's the right move?
Well, so Syria is a real problem. It's an outlier in the case where perhaps the administration's subtle policy is seen more as weakness than strength. The United States has determined, whether it's right or wrong, that this is not a problem we can solve, that the Syrian state and society are in a period of extraordinary self-destruction and are not necessarily willing to listen to outside actors. Others say the United States should be intervening much more robustly. Where I come out is that I do not support us getting involved militarily. I think that supporting the opposition with political means, intelligence, information sharing, skills building of various kinds is appropriate, and that opposition will slowly become the recognized government of Syria. But I think for us to get involved in the war is just not going to happen under Obama's watch unless there were some shift that meant that some vital American national interests were at stake. So far, we're not there.
Briefly, there was a so-called reset with relations with Russia. How do you expect that to continue again in this second term?
Yeah, I think people really do regret that whether it's Vladimir Putin's personality, whether it's world economic dynamics or something, that the U.S.-Russia relationship has a little bit gone off the rails. And there's just more friction there than I think we think is warranted or necessary. It seems to be coming more or less from the Russian side. I don't know whether the Obama administration plans to develop a totally new strategy towards Russia. I think they're still hopeful that we can find areas where we want to cooperate more than not. Iran has been a source of some tension, but both on Iran and Syria, I think the Russians are coming a little bit closer to our view of the problem than they had been previously.
If you were to move forward 4 years from now and look back over Mr. Obama's second term, how would you determine whether or not this administration's foreign policy had been a success or not?
Well, I think that to many people's surprise, President Obama turned out to be very strong, in his first term, was a very strong national security president. I think people had worried that he would be a little bit too soft or not interested in American power. And in fact, I think that some of the high points of his foreign policy were in that pretty, making tough decisions where you don't have enough information and you have to make a judgment call. And certainly the killing of Osama bin Laden belongs in that category. So he only passed one treaty that got through the Senate. I thought he might have done more on the global governance side of things. But I think in terms of defending our interests and really defining a glide path to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, he's pretty much on track of what he said he was going to do.
Elaine Lapson, thank you very much.
Thank you.